All right. Welcome to the Chronicles of Davidson Hang, Chapter 10, Imposter Syndrome. So, I wanted to discuss with you a topic that I found interesting. Yesterday I met with a few folks that Zach Malho, who's into. So, we're creating a men's group called MTC Meditation Therapy and Coaching. So, it should be interesting next week on Thursday. It's going to be our first one. So I'm super excited about that. And so I wanted to have a discussion where I talked about imposter syndrome today. And I think it's an interesting topic. I think we all struggle with it at some point. I think everybody does, honestly. So I read a ton of billionaire biographies, and a lot of them have the same. It's interesting, right? Because you have like people like Paul Allen, who is Microsoft's co-founder, the founder of the company that I work at. And a lot of people, especially very ambitious people, have a have some insecurities. I think that's why people like us work very hard. I think everyone has imposter syndrome. If you look at famous people or comedians, they're the most insecure people. I mean, that's why, when you're a comedian, you laugh and you try to make others laugh because you want people to be happy. But sometimes there's a sense of unhappiness within your own life, and I think the most vulnerable comedians are always the best, right? You look at like Kevin Hart or anyone like that, and you find it funny because they are hilarious. So the reason why I want to discuss imposter syndrome is because a lot of there's been a lot of moments in my life where I felt like I didn't belong. And it's interesting because looking back, reflecting upon it now after therapy and coaching and self develop a ton out hundreds of hours of self development conversations and work, I realized that it's just my own narrative, and that's certainly not the case, right? Even within my fraternity or in high school, when I was a part of a lot of different groups, I felt like I didn't belong, but that wasn't necessarily true. They invited me, like, from hanging out with Asians. Like, I was like, oh, I felt like I was not Asian enough because I've never been to Asia. Or when I went to an all Chinese school, I was the one of two Vietnamese students, so felt like an imposter there. But I think I made it bigger than it really was. So just interesting to think about and reflect upon where in your life you felt like you didn't belong, but in reality you did. It was just your own narrative. But I think in a way it's made me who I am. I think that's why I host so many networking events and I host a lot of get-togethers, because I've often found myself like, oh, wanting to have more like connections, and it's an interesting dynamic because I do love like meeting new people. Like, I get a lot of energy from that. Anyone who knows me. But sometimes, the reason why I do a podcast where, I spend an hour with someone is to learn more about them, right? And to share, because I think people are innately curious. I think that's why Lewis Howes and Tim Ferriss has millions and millions of listeners, because people do want to learn about people and the human connection of it all. But going back to imposter syndrome, I would say there like the three biggest crucial moments, other than the ones I shared with you already. I remember when I was working at AlphaServe Technologies, I was working with a lot of financial services, and I know nothing about financial services, like literally like nothing at all. But I was meeting with hedge fund managers, private equity, VCs, which stands for venture capital, and bankers and such. And I just felt like so out of place. But I think in my own head because I would go like every day, right? So, when you spend like a year or whatever or that much time like going to all these networking events, like, dude, like I'm pretty sure most people don't spend that much time with their communities, because a lot of people have families and stuff like that. But I was going to like I think I went to like 1,000. I've been to 1,000 networking events or seminars. Like it was insane. Like I was obsessed. But looking back at it, I think it was a way of kind of like, I mean, I learned a lot from it. Don't get me wrong, but I think in a way it was to deal with my like imposter syndrome. So interesting topic. So I gave a talk at LinkedIn to one of the teams, to the team, the SDR teams. So one of the sales team about imposter syndrome and gave them instances and examples of how it pops up with all of us and tools to how to deal with it. And so it's been an interesting journey. The second pivotal moment is I remember I moved to Connecticut and it was like it's the suburbs, right? So it wasn't close enough to the city where I can just like, but I remember like feeling so like depressed and so like, man, like it's interesting because I think at SHI, like some people viewed me like I was like the mayor there. Like I knew everyone. And yet I left that company because I was just so comfortable there. But I think that was like one of the times where I really found my groove. But then it's funny because when I look back at like high school or even middle school or college, especially, like I was sort of like that everywhere. Like I knew everyone and I was able to get along with like everything from the choir to drama to the football players to track and bowling and newspaper. I was a part of, the Asian Culture Club and everything, right? And it was interesting because I realized it was my way of trying to fit in. And I think I'm just being hard on myself because honestly, all those moments I did feel connected, but for some reason, my internal dialogue was like, oh, like I'm not sure if they like me or not. So my whole life was trying to figure out to like get people to like me. But it's interesting because I work at LinkedIn, which, literally the main reason why LinkedIn exists is to connect people, right? To build relationships. So imposter syndrome is a bitch. It's crazy. It affects all of us and it affects the people who are typically the most gregarious, right? I think that's why we try to get, like I've written 1,000 handwritten notes, right? And I did that like subconsciously because it's like, well, this will brighten someone's day. So yeah. And then thirdly, the another big moment for me was like when I went through this coaching program called Landmark, and I think like a light bulb switch, like I think that was what finally got out of my imposter syndrome. And it definitely still comes up now and then, right? Don't get me wrong, but it was the self-expression leadership program, which is the third program in a coaching self-development program. So that was a pivotal moment, where I just felt like so at home and I felt like so valued and so loved. And yeah, that was huge for me. So yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Would love to hear your takeaways. Any feedback would be amazing. And yeah, love you guys. Peace.